What if there was a place, a secret place, where nothing was impossible? A miraculous place where you could actually change the world. You want to go?
If there's any one person who's really helped forward this idea of animated films, animated and kids' films in general being regarded as a major art form in the modern era, it's Brad Bird. Between The Iron Giant, The Incredibles, Ratatouille, and a crap ton of television shows under his belt, he is impeccable as far as artists go. And his impact on the medium, on Pixar, and people just in general taking things traditionally thought as kiddies seriously is immeasurable. But what I think makes him stand out most among his peers, and especially his friends at Pixar, is that he's sort of become a auteur of animation. At least one of the biggest in America, anyway. I can't really speak for any Japanese studios. I mean, sure, John Lasseter's the face of Pixar, and he's helped make the first two Toy Story movies, but he also directed the two Cars films, so talent wise, that kind of balances out. Honestly, at this point, I think he'll be more remembered for his creative executive position at Disney than anything else. Not necessarily his personal talent, but his eye for seeing potential and talent in others. After all, he's been one of the chief engineers in rebuilding the Disney empire, and he was the leader in building Pixar from the ground up. He was the kind of person who could see sketches of Wreck-It Ralph and Frozen and say, those are the kind of things Disney needs to turn around. Or conversely, looking at pictures of Woody and Buzz and saying, yes, those will be the figures of a new animation empire. In terms of Pixar canon, Pete Docter's probably comparable in terms of prestige, but he's had his hand in almost all of Pixar's films. He's one of the biggest contributors to their image as this big communal team who are constantly focus testing each other's works, giving advice and helping each other out make masterpieces, where no one really stands out as the individual mind behind it. Brad Bird's Incredibles actually still stands as the only one of their features where the directing and screenplay duties were credited to one man, and in an industry defined by massive teams pouring their blood, sweat, and tears into each frame together, Brad Bird seems to do things his way. What really solidified him not just as a great animation mind, but also a great auteur was his jarringly seamless transition into live action with Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol. I mean, Jesus, who else would have been capable of turning a dormant franchise into one of Tom Cruise's best films in years? Hell, Bird hit it so far out of the park on his first go that Disney was willing to hand him the reins to their billion-dollar Star Wars investment, something they're very desperate not to screw up. And you know what? That would have been amazing. The genuine character moments, the sense of old fashioned sci fi, the incredible score, the humor. It would have been amazing. Tomorrowland must have been one heck of a project for him to turn down such an amazing opportunity. That's why it's so baffling to see Tomorrowland be so blah. I mean, usually when a turf filmmaker fails, it's a train wreck or some kind of morbidly fascinating work of artistic skill, hubris, and vision colliding to create something utterly fascinating, at least. But Tomorrowland is kind of a whiff of air. I can't even really call it bad because it's stylish and well acted, and enough of Brad Bird's signatures make it in to make it watchable and even enjoyable at times. But it also shows some terrible decisions that have never appeared in his work before. Terrible structure, little payoff, obnoxious mysteries that go nowhere, unrealized worlds and potential. Someone else has to be responsible for this, right? Lindelof. For those who don't bother to keep track of screenwriters, David Lindelof is one of J.J. Abrams' posse who parlayed the success of Lost into a film career, along with Alex Kurtzman and Robert Orkey. And much like those two, leaving the Star Trek nest has resulted in immediately tumbling out of the nest, crashing on the pavement, and spontaneously combusting. While Orky and Quartz have been busy slowly rotting away the Transformers series and making a Spider Man film so bad that Sony had to give up on their master plans to permanently withhold their toys from Marvel, Lindelof has been at the helm of several high profile, much hyped projects that have all resulted in shocking duds, including, but not limited to, Jon Favreau's Cowboys and Aliens, Ridley Scott's Prometheus, Star Trek Into Darkness, and World War Z. Apparently, he was behind those terrible rewrites. Now, I know it seems unreasonable to blame all of these flops on one man, but considering the talent surrounding each of these projects and the surefire hits they all seem to be, he's the only common denominator among them. And frankly, given so much proven failure, both critically and financially at this point, I'm stunned anyone at Disney would sign off on this. And it's very clear he hasn't learned his lesson, so I can only hope Hollywood starts to learn theirs. So, because statistically most people haven't seen this movie, I feel like I should do a quick synopsis explaining the main plot. So, mostly it stars this girl named Casey, an optimist in a pessimistic world slowly being brought down by global warming, anger, and general disillusionment. So, she goes out of her way to sabotage the destruction of a NASA site twice, which garners the attention of a girl named Athena, a young girl who isn't a robot, and if she were, they'd wait to tell us till later, who provides her a pin that shows her images of Tomorrowland, a secluded society of the world's best and brightest minds coming together to build a utopia. However, after she's attacked by robots, Athena reveals that Tomorrowland has been taken over by a tyrant named Nyx, who sealed it off and is slowly rotting it away. So, those two together need to unite with Frank, one of Tomorrowland's best and brightest minds who was exiled, to sneak back into the city, art, usurp. They need to So the two of them need to unite with Frank, a disillusioned George Clooney who was once one of the brightest minds of the city who was only kicked out. So together they need to unite with So together they need to unite with Frank. So together they need to unite with Frank, who was played by George Clooney. So together they need to unite with George Clooney's Frank, one of Tomorrowland's brightest minds who was kicked out of this city for unknown reasons. So the three of them need to sneak back into Tomorrowland, defeat Nyx, and save the universe. And that's pretty much just the main plot. For sake of comparison, I want to talk a lot about BioShock as I start to break down Tomorrowland a little bit. Both because it's one of my favorite video games of all time, but I feel like it's also a game that can create some striking parallels to Tomorrowland that will help understand what went wrong. Both imagine a secluded society where the world's best minds have decided to supersede those filthy normies to make a city where they can do whatever they want, free of politics, religion, financial influence, traditional morale, and general naysayers. So I feel like the comparison makes a lot of sense. Moreover, Ken Levine, the creator of Bioshock, is a very similar figure to Brad Bird. In an industry known for being large group efforts, Ken Levine has stood out as sort of an individual auteur who's helped move the industry forward. I really do want to keep this connection going throughout the video because how Bioshock handled this implausible metaphoric society shows that Tomorrowland could have easily handled these broad strokes. To begin, the actual Tomorrowland, a society created by Tesla, Edison, Verne, and Eiffel to promote the best of society, is barely in this movie. All those clips of Britt Robertson roaming around and looking at all these amazing things, a single scene. Granted, a very cool single scene designed to be a single take, but only a single scene. See, after sabotaging the destruction of a rocket site multiple times, Britt's Casey earns the interest of a prepubescent robotic girl named Athena, who gives her a pin that allows her to astrally project her to the city. The majority of the film from there is a slow burn, with an emphasis on the word slow, naturally, of Casey and Athena trying to get to Tomorrowland, where something has gone horribly wrong that they just refuse to tell us until the last possible minute. So instead of getting to see the city for the majority of a movie, hop between fight scenes, driving, banter, more driving, meet Clooney, another fight scene, banter, vague idea of what's going on, fight scene, fleeing, banter, Paris, Tomorrowland. As a result, we end up really learning nothing about the city the film is named after. Instead, we get dragged along with bits and pieces until we finally get there and realize that they have no interest in exploring the city at all, that it's just a means to an end. As typical of Lindelof, and really the entire Abrams crew, this is what passes as a good story for them. Withholding basic plot information for the sake of a mystery until the last possible minute, only to still really tell us nothing or wrap it up in any meaningful way. Those answers are shoved to the very brinks of the margins and through these elaborate Easter egg hunts. Lest we forget, there was an extensive in-universe website queuing in all the details of this world and a quote-unquote discovered box of artifacts, an actual freaking mystery box. I hate stuff like this. This isn't a part of the movie, it's marketing. You don't get to hand a glossary to people entering the theater and pass it off as a part of the experience. And it's every single work this guy does. Cowboys and Aliens, Prometheus, Into Darkness, Lost. He just refuses to tell us stuff because he thinks that's what a good story is. Not telling us shit isn't clever writing. It's being a bad writer because these are basic details we're never told. Who founded this place? How does the government function? What level of interaction is there between these worlds? Why is it suddenly a dystopia? If it takes place in an alternate reality, then doesn't that mean there should be people all around this place too who are going to discover this city? Like, how does that work? If this is an alleged enlightened society, then why are they letting this absolutist monarch apparently run the place? I mean, Jesus, these aren't incidental little plot details that would just enrich in the experience. These are core things that you leave the audience questioning as they're trying to enjoy the movie. This is where I think BioShock demonstrates the right way to do what Lindelof routinely fails at. See, in BioShock, the city is called Rapture and it's underwater. It's actually presented in a very similar fashion as Tomorrowland. An outsider is dragged into this fantastical world that by the time they reach it, it's already fallen apart. It even follows the same path of slowly giving us information. But see, BioShock understands pacing. The minute you're submerged underwater, you get this nifty animation that really lays out the core fundamentals of what Rapture's about, a society where everyone is supposed to reap their own profits and benefits.
I am Andrew Ryan, and I'm here to ask you a question. Is a man not entitled to the sweat of his brow? No, says the man in Washington, it belongs to the poor. No, says the man in the Vatican, it belongs to God. No, says the man in Moscow, it belongs to everyone. I rejected those answers. Instead, I chose something different.
From there, you're constantly barraged with visual cues, audio logs, and subtle exposition to constantly build the world around you and keep you interested in learning more. There's always mystery, but you always have a solid idea of what's happening. A great example of this is Cabin in the Woods, which right away establishes a world in which we know from the very start there are stiff office types manipulating the world around them, but then it just keeps adding more and more complicated layers to keep us just on the verge of understanding, but right on that edge where we're interested in knowing more, but we know enough to get what's happening. That's good mystery. It's also just good world building, especially when you're dealing with things that are based around major themes and metaphors. You need to understand the core concept going in, or you're just going to be asking way too many questions. Now, obviously, video games and movies have radically different structures. A reason why audio logs work so well in BioShock is because a video game is sort of an open museum free for exploration where you can find these things, whereas a movie is a very guided tour through a museum on a set path. But there's still countless ways Tomorrowland could have emulated this to better success. I was surprised to find the film originally opened with an animation much like BioShock, detailing the city's founding fathers and the general theme of the movie.
Edison, Eiffel, Verne, Tesla come together to form Plus Ultra, a group dedicated to the cultivation of mankind's greatest resource, imagination. And upon that foundation, they would build their dream, a place where nothing was impossible. Another path for humanity, a tomorrow we need not fear, but one we can aspire to. And that, fellow traveler, is why you have been invited here. At long last, We are building that tomorrow. You are about to enter a world of miracles and wonders, a shining beacon of hope for humankind.
Instead, it was dropped for this really dumb framing device, which mostly serves to provide a perspective jump and to serve as a decent reveal to whom they're telling the story to. But the animation is a perfect way to establish the world, then lead right into this flashback of a young George Clooney. See, you demonstrate the theme both verbally and then visually by showing the origins of the city in the 1950s. Moreover, it opens a great opportunity for young Frank to be sort of a parallel, showing how his journey differs from Casey's and also invite us into the city. But we don't get another flashback until way later, which mostly just serves to explain why Frank is such a grump. Another mystery the movie just drags for no reason. The amount of world building you can do with flashbacks would answer so many questions without having to radically change the structure of the film. This would have allowed us to see the origins of the city, how Frank was included in that city, what he did to get kicked out, and moreover, what slowly led to this place becoming a dystopia. Granted, unlike Bioshock, you have to show the regular world to make the film's message meaningful. Bioshock just throws you into the underwater world, whereas Tomorrowland sort of needs to show a decaying real world. And they do a great job with this, but there's so much padding to these sections. I mean, do we really need 2 scenes of Casey breaking into the NASA site when one would suffice? Or several scenes of playing around with a pin? Granted, one of the bright spots of the film is how they establish Casey's character in this pessimistic world, but for a director known for having tightly knit works, there's a shocking amount of bloat. Another thing is the villain. The villain just really makes no sense, a reminder of Lindelof's inability to write a villain that makes any sense, and his ineptitude for writing characters with vague motives in general. Athena reveals to Casey on their road trip that David Nix, the sort of Sherpa for Tomorrowland candidates at the start of the film, has become a dictator and locked off connections to the outside world, and has left the city to slowly rot into a decaying ruin. But see, why? After his introduction as just a general grump, we don't really see him again until the very last minute when we get back to the city. I mean, we see his kind of funny henchman, but the transition from douche to dictator makes very little sense. As a result, he doesn't work as a character. What were his ambitions for the city? How was he even qualified to be a leader? Why would Tomorrowland put a single person in charge of this entire city? Why does he hate Frank so much? Conversely, in Bioshock, the City of Rapture is run by one man as well, Andrew Ryan, and while he's barely seen in person, he's able to become one of gaming's most highly regarded villains and an absolute forceful presence throughout the entire narrative.
Rapture isn't some sunken ship for you to plunder, and Andrew Ryan isn't a giddy socialite who could be slapped around by government muscle. And with that, farewell, or до свидания, whichever.
Through audio logs, the reactions of other characters, and his own actions, he becomes a presence that hangs over the entire enterprise. Despite being present physically in one scene, even less than Nix, what do I know about Andrew Ryan? Well, he's extremely paranoid about government, he's hypocritical enough to compromise his worldview to execute a rival and brainwash his citizens, he's committed enough to those same ideals to burn down an entire forest to keep it from being nationalized, he's passive-aggressive, an adulterer, capable of murdering by his own hand, and ultimately accepting of his fate when he's out of cards. Again, video games grant a fair amount of padding, roughly 13 hours versus a little over 2, but you still have plenty of space to give Nix a character, any character. Hell, you have an easy framing device through Athena. She's right there by his side at the beginning of Tomorrowland and helping him recruit people for the city. They more or less sell her as his daughter in the beginning. So why does she have very little to say about Nix? Why can't she chime in and let us know about his fall from grace? I mean, Jesus, did the last 60 years of literal universe building leave you with no impression of him, Athena? I understand you're a robot and can't express emotions, but you still probably have recordings of him, you still probably have recollections of him, you should be at least able to reciprocate the things he did objectively so we could understand him. Wouldn't you want Casey and Frank to know this so they're ready for whatever happens? He does have some saving grace at the end of the film with a pretty cool rant, but it also serves to just be yet another breaking point for the film. So, when we get back to Tomorrowland, it is finally revealed why Frank was kicked out of the city and why the world is doomed for some reason. So, Frank created a device that could predict the future, and in the process, it inadvertently created a doomsday clock counting down the impending apocalypse of the Earth, thus leading Nix to exile him, cancel all plans to add new recruits to the population, and to cancel any plans to integrate with Earth and show off their new technology. But Casey realizes that, much like the pin, the giant sphere Frank's device is in astrally projects images of potential futures and realities to people, not guaranteed ones, thus creating a self-fulfilling prophecy of doom. But Nix is apparently okay with this happening, instead of just, shutting the thing off, because it turns out that he tried to use these images to scare Earth into fixing their ways. Instead, it just resulted in them marketing it in films, games, and songs and being more reserved to it than ever, thus reserving Nix to their doom. Now, I know a lot of people weren't a fan of the scene, but I actually really enjoy his tirade. Granted, it's one of those times where the characters tell us the moral of the story directly to our face, but I think it really works here because the entire film has worked in these broad strokes. In fact, Bioshock has a very similar moment near its end. When you have this dictator backed up against a wall, Andrew Ryan flips a table on you by revealing that you, the main character, is a sleeper agent programmed to return to the city and assassinate him. See, this works because the theme of the game was player choice. Andrew Ryan built this city to ensure that every man had the choice to do what he wanted with his success and or failure, and you were given all these choices throughout the game that turn out to be, surprise, meaningless. A shocking commentary on the relationship between players, player characters, and our initiative when we're being told what to do in a video game. But again, this worked because there was build up to it. There were little hints and clues throughout the game, but more importantly, there wasn't a big neon sign saying, "There's a huge reveal coming up." It was a surprise because we didn't see it coming. That's the point of a twist. You're not expecting a twist. That's why it catches you off guard. Like Into Darkness, Lost, Prometheus, Cloverfield, which Abrams produced, we're told up front that there's a huge reveal coming up, but instead of building up to it, we just wait till the very last minute to get told something, and it always comes off as stupid. Not to mention, this raises even more questions for Tomorrowland because they didn't bother to explain anything. Why is that an exilable offense? Isn't that the greatest achievement mankind has ever made? Couldn't you use it to barter with Earth to change their ways? Shouldn't you make a point of keeping Tomorrowland in pristine shape if it's destined to be humanity's last sanctuary? And while I like the fight scene at the end, a reminder that for all the lectures and ideals, if you want a better world, you need to fight for it and do it with action, was the best design anyone could have thought of for this device really a giant ball? Really? One of our best minds in animation and the studio that's made all of these classics could only think of a giant death ball, a Death Star, if you will? That's something you throw in at the last minute when you're at a deadline and can't think of anything else. Now, I know I've been rambling for way too long about this film, but final question. Who's the protagonist? The more you think about it, it's actually pretty vague. I assume they intended it to be Casey, and admittedly, she's a pretty engaging character. She's persistent, she has a good relationship with her family, she's funny, she can also serve as a straight man when the situation calls for it. And it's nice to see a female character skilled in all things STEM in a major blockbuster and it not being treated like some kind of shocking revelation. Girls can do math? But what is her arc? What does she learn by the end of the film? How do these experiences impact her in any way? To be fair, I'm not the kind of person who thinks every single protagonist needs to go through a life-altering emotional change by the end of the film, but this is a pretty big problem. One of my favorite characters in current film is Captain America, who's a perfect example of a character who doesn't change. A static comic book hero being the same super person before he became a hero as he did after. But see, they counter that by completely altering his world. The character becomes dynamic by how he reacts to the world around him. His growth stems from how he conceptualizes his place in the world and how his morals can be applied in a new setting. Now, I guess you could argue that this is a similar case with Casey, seemingly finding a place where her optimism and ambition would finally be championed by someone other than her father, but then discovers that that place has slowly been drained of its hope, and now she's the only one who can save it. It's a sort of test of faith, if you will. I can totally get behind that. But because Tomorrowland, the place, is given so little depth, how can I feel bad for her? I mean, what did she even really know about it? Why is she so committed to it despite not seeing that much of it? Not to mention, they struggle to really explain why she, in particular, is needed to save this place and the world. Is she the only pepper chipper person left in the entire planet? They could have used this to make it something interesting, like how Tomorrowland was super exclusive to certain demographics in the past, because, 1950s and everything, and how she represents a broader, more diverse future. Or maybe Athena looked into the future to see the things Casey could accomplish if she was given the necessary push, and this is the only way she can get it. But instead, it's another bland chosen one sort of thing with no real context. Moreover, she's completely lost in the final battle, with Frank overcoming his grouchiness to blow up his old machine and in the process kill Athena, whom we learn he was attracted to as a kid. Yeah, you know what? Most critics have already harped on that, so I'm not even gonna bother. He goes through this big arc of having to learn to let go of his disillusionment and reimagine his vision of a brighter future in the modern world. But he too loses growth for the sake of mystery, because we only find out what makes him so snippy in the last few minutes of the film, stunting what should have been an entire arc throughout the film. And that's before we remember that he's booted from about half the film. Protagonists are hard to find when they're missing for almost half the film. It's not that hard to do films with duos whose arcs intertwine, but they need to have at least one stand above the other as the main protagonist, whose growth is necessary for the survival of both of them. Oddly enough, the Pixar pals Bird normally works with are great with this. With the exception of The Incredibles, pretty much every Pixar film has a duo, and it's figuring out which one of those characters is the one who needs to grow that makes those narratives compelling. Many times in the about month and a half I spent working on a review for a movie that nobody saw, I wondered why I was bothering with this. But you know what? This film is worth talking about. Yes, it didn't pan out, but its messages and morals are very important. We should be encouraging optimism. We should be encouraging people to push for a better future. And I love the way it presents it through this incredible fantastical world. But because it was dragged down by a screenwriter who didn't seem to understand what he had on his hands, it ends up becoming a bland, monotonous slog to go with plenty of other blockbuster slogs we've been forced to sit through. And it's a shame because everyone else seems so committed to this. It seems like Brad Bird was really passionate about this project, only to get dragged down. Clooney and Britt seemed on point. It seemed like everyone believed in this. And just as importantly, it seems like this is a message Disney's been pushing for his entire life. Say what you want about Walt Disney being an evil dictator or a tyrant or whatever, but one thing that was really impressive with him was his commitment to this idea of futurism, that there was a better world we could all make together if we kept working.
In our modern world, everywhere we look, we see the influence science has upon our daily lives. Many of the things that seem impossible now will become realities tomorrow. A beautiful tomorrow, just a dream away. That says we're going places. There's progress ahead.
And it's a shame that that vision didn't make it through this trek because, it's worth saying. And, I hope someday someone looks at this and says, yeah, there is something here. And they look at similar works to find a better way to present it. And we do get the Tomorrowland everyone wants to see. Because if it came together properly, I couldn't think of a better film to represent the Walt Disney brand, Walt Disney himself, the vision of Brad Bird, or even just the idea of optimism and science in general than this film. Or this theoretical film I've been trying to build this whole time.
Where people actually live a life they can't find anywhere else in the world.
Hey guys, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. I had a lot of fun making it. I worked really hard. And if you enjoyed it, make sure you like and subscribe for videos in the future. This one was sort of a rough proof of concept. Hopefully during the school year I'll have access to a little better tech. So hopefully the production quality will go up as I make more videos. Let me know what you think, and if you want to see more or a specific film talked about, let me know. And I hope you enjoyed this one. Side note though, I was thinking, How come Walt Disney isn't actually in this movie? I mean, they referenced him a lot in the trailers, but he never shows up. Wouldn't it have been awesome to have friggin' Tom Hanks show up and have it be this whole shared universe? Would have been crazy. Alright, goodbye. Make sure you subscribe.